Imagine you're holding a legal document, like a piece of paper that gives you absolute, legally binding authority to make medical decisions for your spouse if they ever become incapacitated.
Right.
You walk into a hospital, you hand that document to the attending physician, and you expect it to be honored. You expect to be a team working to save the person you love.
Exactly. You'd think that's the baseline.
But instead, the doctor looks at you, looks at the document, completely ignores it,
Hmm.
and then calls hospital security to have you removed from the building.
It sounds like something out of a thriller, honestly. But according to the massive cache of documents we are unpacking today, that is precisely what happened. We are looking at a scenario where a hospital didn't just, ignore a patient's advocate. They actively engineered a process to legally erase him from the picture.
Today's deep dive is centered around a profoundly disturbing set of sources.
Yeah.
We have a forensic expose, legal demand letters, billing data, and formal complaints submitted to the Arizona Attorney General, the Medical Board, and the Joint Commission.
It's a mountain of evidence.
It really is. All of this material was compiled by a man named Kevin Benham and surrounds the death of his husband, 39-year-old Nicholas Javier Araya. Nicholas died on July 3, 2025 at Banner University Medical Center South, which is often referred to as BUMCS, down in Tucson, Arizona.
The sheer volume of the source material here is staggering. Kevin didn't just write an angry letter to administration. He obtained and audited 60,000 pages of electronic medical records, or EMRs.
60,000 pages.
Yeah, he went through the metadata, the audit trails, the hidden physician notes. He essentially used the hospital's own internal documentation to build a case for what he legally categorizes in his demand letters as institutional homicide.
I want to pause on that phrase, institutional homicide,
Right.
because the central mission of today's deep dive is to unpack a really terrifying question.
Right.
When we look at Nicholas Araya's death, are we looking at the tragic but inevitable result of a profoundly sick man whose body just gave out, like perhaps combined with some systemic incompetence and bad coincidences?
Yeah. Or, and this is what the forensic documents argue, are we looking at the intentional, systematic actions of a hospital that decided to eliminate a patient because he was a financial liability?
Right. Navigating that line between incompetence and calculated intent is really going to be our focus today.
Because the sources build a narrative that this wasn't a broken system making a mistake. The argument here is that the system worked exactly as it was designed to.
Yeah.
Using administrative policies, medical gaslighting, and highly specific, questionable medication choices to achieve a financially motivated outcome.
Before we really get into the mechanics of this, I need to make something explicitly clear to you listening. We are here to impartially report on the claims, the legal arguments, and the evidence as they are presented in Kevin Benham's forensic documents and demand letters.
Absolutely.
We are exploring the narrative constructed by these sources. We are not taking a side. We are not legally endorsing these accusations, and we certainly aren't in a position to declare criminal guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Our job today is to examine the story these documents tell and the broader systemic questions they raise.
That is a crucial distinction. We are analyzing a documented legal and forensic argument. We are looking at how a modern hospital chart can potentially be used not to record care, but to build a defense for withholding it.
Exactly. You've probably navigated the healthcare system yourself, or maybe you've helped a parent or a partner do it. You trust the doctors and the white coats. You trust that what goes into your chart is a scientific, objective truth.
Right. A factual logbook.
But what happens when that chart becomes a weapon? What happens when a hospital's algorithm decides you're too expensive to keep alive? To understand how Nicholas's death was allegedly engineered, we first have to understand the motive. We have to understand the corporate math. So who was Nicholas clinically when he walked through those doors?
Well, he was facing a mountain of physiological challenges. Nicholas was only 39, but he had survived 7 strokes.
Oh, 7.
Yeah, and those strokes had left him completely blind and paralyzed. On top of the neurological damage, he had end-stage renal disease.
Meaning his kidneys.
Right. His kidneys had completely failed, which meant he relied on hemodialysis 3 times a week just to filter the toxins from his blood. And he also suffered from heart failure.
That is an overwhelming amount of illness for someone so young. A body dealing with all of that is going to be in constant crisis.
It is. And because of that profound level of illness, staying out of the hospital was almost impossible for him. The hospital's own case management discharge screening tool, which is basically an algorithm that evaluates patients upon admission, flagged Nicholas immediately.
What did it flag him as?
On June 24th, they labeled him a high utilizer. The records indicate he had 23 hospital encounters in just the prior 12
He
months.
had 23 hospital visits in a single year. I look at that number, and as a human being, I see immense suffering. But reading through these financial documents, it seems like the hospital system looks at that number and sees a massive threat to their bottom line. I get that hospitals lose money on uninsured or underinsured patients all the time, but why does a hospital caring for a chronically ill guy in Arizona suddenly jump from taking a standard financial hit to allegedly wanting him dead?
To understand the leap, we really have to pull back and look at the macro level of healthcare finance, specifically something called value-based care metrics.
Okay, lay it on me.
Two programs are highly relevant here: the Medicare Hospital Readmissions Reduction Program and the ESRD Quality Incentive Program. Now, these were created by the federal government with a genuinely noble intention.
Right, to improve care.
Exactly. The idea was to stop hospitals from providing sloppy care, discharging people too early, and having them bounce right back to the emergency room.
So the government says, hey, if you do a bad job and the patient comes back within 30 days, we are going to fine you. That sounds like a good way to hold hospitals accountable.
On the surface, yes. But here is the mechanism of that penalty, and this is where it gets dangerous for someone like Nicholas. The penalty isn't just on the bill for that specific patient.
Wait, it's not?
No. If a hospital exceeds a certain threshold of readmissions, Medicare can penalize them up to 3% of their total system-wide Medicare payments.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Banner Health, the parent company here, is a $15.6 billion corporate entity. 3% of their overarching Medicare reimbursement is an astronomical amount of cash.
Oh wow, I didn't realize the penalty scaled like that. So Nicholas isn't just costing them the price of his IV fluids in his bed. His constant, unavoidable readmissions are actually dragging down the profitability of the entire hospital system.
The forensic report uses a very specific phrase for this. They call it financial toxicity. Nicholas was a financially toxic patient, and that's just the macro level. On the micro level, the daily operational cost, it was just as bad.
How so?
Well, the documents point out that Arizona Medicaid's urban cost-to-charge ratio only reimburses about 14% of actual hospital charges.
Wait, 14%? So if a day in the ICU costs the hospital $10,000 in nursing staff, continuous heart monitoring, and specialist consults, the state is only cutting them a check for $1,400.
Precisely. They are bleeding thousands of dollars of actual cash every single day. Nicholas is in a bed. Now, consider the institutional history of Banner Health that the sources bring to light.
That's their track record.
Back in 2018, Banner settled a False Claims Act lawsuit with the Department of Justice for over $18 million. The government alleged that 12 Banner hospitals, including this specific one, BUMCS, were deliberately keeping patients overnight who could have been sent home, simply to pad their Medicare bills.
They were optimizing their medical records to squeeze more money out of the government. And they got caught.
They got caught because a clinical documentation specialist, one of their own people, whose job is to make sure charts justify billing, blew the whistle. The forensic report argues that this established a documented systemic culture of manipulating patient care for corporate financial gain.
And the argument is that this culture continued.
The allegation is that in 2025 with Nicholas, they used that same institutional muscle, but in reverse. Instead of keeping a profitable patient too long, the goal was to permanently remove an unprofitable patient from the acute care cycle to avoid those massive readmission penalties.
I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a bedside doctor. I mean, I understand the CEO cares about a 3% Medicare penalty, but the attending physician on the third floor isn't the one balancing the corporate checkbook. How does this billion-dollar financial pressure actually reach the room where Nicholas is lying in bed?
That is the insidious nature of modern hospital administration. It trickles down through daily metrics. Doctors and nurses have morning huddles where they discuss length of stay metrics.
Right.
Case managers are assigned to the floors with the explicit goal of discharging patients. The EMR system itself throws up colored flags on a patient's chart if they are a high utilizer or if their length of stay is exceeding the profitable limit. The physician might not be looking at a spreadsheet, but they are absolutely feeling the administrative pressure to clear that bed.
Which brings us to a really disturbing corporate relationship detailed in the files. The hospice pipeline.
Yes. So in December 2023, Banner Health made a strategic business decision. They closed their own internal hospice operations in Phoenix and Tucson.
Oh.
Instead, they partnered with a third-party organization called Hospice of the Valley. The documents argue this created a highly efficient, seamless pipeline. If you have a high utilizer patient who is threatening your readmission metrics, the fastest way to get them off your books permanently is to transition them to hospice.
Because then the rules change.
Exactly. Once they are on hospice, the goal shifts from curative care to comfort care, and they stop bouncing back to your emergency room.
It essentially takes them out of the penalty equation entirely. And the documents show this pipeline activating with shocking speed in Nicholas's case. He is admitted late on June 23rd. The very next morning, June 24th, at 8:17 a.m., before his clinical workup is even finished, before the specialists have really weighed in, a referral is already sent to Hospice of the Valley.
Less than 12 hours after he hits the floor. The overarching question the sources raise here is about the unintended consequences of value-based care. If the metric for a hospital's financial success is making sure the patient doesn't come back, what does that mean for a patient with profound brain damage and kidney failure who literally requires constant hospitalization to live?
It creates a perverse incentive where the only guaranteed way to succeed is if the patient dies.
Unfortunately, yes.
But it's one thing to see a patient as a financial loss on a computer screen. It is an entirely different thing for a team of nurses and doctors to stand at a bedside and treat a human being as expendable. To drop the standard of care, they have to justify it psychologically, right?
They do. And according to Kevin Denham's audit of these records, the hospital justified it by systematically stripping away Nicholas's humanity. They did this using the medical record itself, employing a psychological phenomenon known in medicine as diagnostic overshadowing.
Let's slow down and really define that, because this seems to be the engine driving the whole tragedy. What is diagnostic overshadowing?
Think of it like the halo effect in psychology, but reversed. If you hear someone is an Ivy League graduate, you might subconsciously assume they are also polite and punctual, even if you have no evidence of it.
Sure.
In medicine, diagnostic overshadowing happens when a patient has a highly stigmatized condition like mental illness, obesity, or, in Nicholas's case, a history of substance abuse.
Oh.
The medical staff allows that stigmatized label to overshadow their clinical judgment.
So it colors everything they see.
Exactly. They start attributing every new physical symptom to the patient's stigmatized condition, rather than investigating the actual physiological cause.
So because his chart mentions a history of drug use, if he is wincing in pain, they assume he's just drug-seeking rather than looking for, say, a ruptured appendix.
That's it perfectly.
Right.
And the language used in Nicholas's chart is astonishingly biased. His active problem list in the computer system didn't just list his strokes and kidney failure. It was populated with pejorative behavioral labels.
What kind of labels?
The EMR called him aggressive, verbally abusive, non-cooperative, and loudly flagged cocaine use.
If I'm a consulting doctor and I open that chart before I even walk into his room, my guard is immediately up. I'm not walking in to heal a sick man. I'm walking in to manage a violent addict.
The chart primes the provider with a defensive bias from the very first click. But the forensic report exposes a tragic medical reality here. Nicholas's behavioral issues, the yelling, the lack of cooperation, were not willful defiance. They were not him being a difficult addict.
Right.
They were the direct, organic physiological symptoms of catastrophic brain damage caused by his strokes.
I want to get into the specific neurology of this because Kevin's documents break it down, and it completely changes how you view Nicholas's actions in that hospital bed. What did the strokes actually do to his brain?
Well, the radiological scans in his file, dating back to October 2024 and February 2023, show extensive dead tissue from multiple strokes. This damage was concentrated in his frontal lobes, his bilateral parieto-occipital lobes, and his pons, which is down in the brainstem. When you destroy those specific areas of the brain, you get very specific neurological syndromes. The first is called abulia. This is a profound lack of will or motivation. It's an inability to act decisively because the frontal lobe, which governs executive function, is damaged.
So when the nurses call him non-cooperative for not wanting to do physical therapy, it's not that he's stubbornly refusing. His brain literally lacks the circuitry to initiate the motivation to move.
Yes, precisely. The second syndrome is anosognosia. This is a neurological inability to perceive one's own illness. The brain cannot process its own deficits. And the third, which was highly prominent, is pseudobulbar effect.
I've heard of that. It's when brain damage causes a disconnect between how someone actually feels emotionally and how they express it physically, right?
Exactly. The brainstem damage severs the pathway that regulates emotional expression. A patient might start laughing hysterically at a funeral or crying uncontrollably when they are perfectly happy. In Nicholas's case, it manifested as sudden, involuntary yelling or outbursts that were completely disconnected from his actual intent.
And the hospital knew this. The documents show that Banner's own neurology specialist diagnosed this years prior.
Yes, they did.
There is consult from a Dr. Hishaw in February 2023 explicitly stating that Nicholas's frontal and temporal lobe damage, quote, can play a role in his behavioral change. A psychiatric evaluation concluded he lacked capacity purely because of organic brain damage.
Yet, when he was admitted in June 2025, the floor staff completely ignored the neurology. There is a heartbreaking nursing note from June 24th by an RN named Morales. She writes that Nicholas was, quote, yelling out loudly, often for no reason, not knowing what he wants.
Oh, man.
As the forensic report points out, that is a textbook clinical description of pseudobulbar effect. The nurse is watching brain damage in real time. But instead of consulting neurology, she charts it as a behavioral disruption. She frames him as a nuisance.
It's like a check engine light is blinking on a car dashboard because the transmission is literally falling out, and the mechanic just writes down, "Car is being annoying and flashing lights at me," and then walks away. The EMR isn't just a record anymore. It has become a digital reputation.
And that digital reputation actively destroyed his quality of life outside the hospital, too. The depositions show that Kevin struggled desperately to get home nursing agencies to help care for Nicholas.
Because they saw the chart.
Exactly. The agencies would request his medical records from Banner, read the label as aggressive and violent addict, and immediately reject him. The hospital's gaslighting ensured he couldn't get care anywhere else.
The emotional toll of this on Kevin and Nick is just devastating. I mean, we were talking about a couple who had been together for 20 years. Imagine surviving 7 strokes. Imagine enduring the brutal exhaustion of dialysis 3 days a week, losing your sight, losing the use of your legs, and fighting with every ounce of willpower you have just to stay alive and be with your husband.
It's unimaginable.
And then, the very doctors you rely on label your sheer will to live as non-compliance.
The documents note that security guards were dispatched to Nicholas's room far more frequently than neurological specialists. They criminalized his disability, and the bias extended beyond the hospital walls.
What do you mean?
The records show notes from EMTs who picked Nicholas up at his home. The EMTs wrote slanderous, medically irrelevant comments in their official transport logs. They implied Kevin and Nick were homeless just because they were waiting outside or describing their home as dirty.
It's an insidious layering of judgment. Everyone is contributing to this narrative that these are marginalized, gross, expendable people. They successfully paint Nicholas as a problem. But the Heart School still has a massive roadblock.
Which
They want to move him to hospice, get him off the balance sheet, and stop treating him. But Nicholas has an advocate. He has Kevin, his medical power of attorney, standing at the bedside demanding life-saving care.
This is where the forensic report shifts from identifying bias to alleging malicious legal strategy. How does a hospital get rid of a legally empowered advocate who refuses to agree to their plan?
They launch a siege.
They do. And this brings us to the first 2 of the 6 smoking guns identified in the EMR audit.
Let's look at smoking gun number 1. This is perhaps the most jaw-dropping piece of documentation in the entire file. It's a physician's progress note written on June 30th. Can you read what the attending doctor actually typed into the official medical record?
The physician wrote, quote, continued and persistent reporting to APS is reasonable. MPOA status could be challenged via this.
APS stands for Adult Protective Services, a state agency designed to protect vulnerable adults from abuse.
Correct. The context here is critical. The hospital staff had been repeatedly calling APS to report Kevin, alleging he was abusing or neglecting Nicholas at home. Kevin estimates there were at least 5 or 6 separate reports filed by the hospital prior to this final admission.
And what did the state find?
The state investigated every single one of them, and every single report came back completely unsubstantiated. The state found 0 evidence of abuse.
So the state agency is essentially telling the hospital, look, there is no abuse here, start calling us. Yet the hospital keeps calling. If I keep calling the police on my neighbor with false accusations, I get arrested for filing a false report. How is a hospital legally allowed to keep weaponizing a state agency like this?
They are exploiting their status as mandatory reporters. Under the law, doctors and nurses are required to report any suspicion of abuse. To encourage reporting, the law grants them broad immunity from civil liability. You can't sue a doctor for making a good faith report that turns out to be wrong.
But there's a catch, right?
There is. That immunity vanishes if the report is made in bad faith or with malicious intent.
And Kevin's argument is that this June 30th note is the literal written definition of bad faith.
Exactly. The doctor isn't writing, "I observed a bruise and fear for the patient's safety." The doctor is writing a legal strategy. They are explicitly stating that the purpose of continuing to call APS is to generate an investigation that can be used to challenge Kevin's medical power of attorney status.
Wow.
They're trying to manufacture a legal pretext to strip him of his rights so the hospital can take control of Nicholas's care decision.
It is terrifying.
Yeah.
Because Kevin has a rock-solid, legally binding MPOA document signed in 2022. Under Arizona law, I think it's ARS 363231, the MPOA has paramount authority. The only way to override it is to get a judge to appoint a guardian.
Right.
But instead of going to a judge, the hospital tries to bypass Kevin entirely through smoking gun number 2, the capacity charade.
Capacity is a legal and medical determination of whether a patient has the cognitive ability to understand their condition and make informed medical decisions. As we discussed, Nicholas's brain damage was profound. But capacity in this hospital seemed to fluctuate based entirely on what the hospital wanted. Let's look at the timeline on June 24th.
This is the day after he is admitted.
Right. At 8:17 in the morning, a case manager writes a note stating that the attending physician evaluated Nicholas and determined he does have capacity. And conveniently, at that exact moment of lucidity, the note says Nicholas, quote, wants hospice info. Based on that, the referral is fired off to Hospice of the Valley.
So the hospital wants him on hospice. They find him legally capable of making that decision right at the exact moment he supposedly agrees to it.
But look what happens just 3 hours and 16 minutes later. At 11:33 a.m., the very same case manager logs another note. This time, she writes that the attending physician states the patient lacks capacity.
Wait. 3 hours later, he magically loses capacity. Why?
The demand letters describe this as a manipulative fishing expedition. If he lacks capacity, it means he can't suddenly change his mind and revoke the hospice referral. It locks the decision in. It's a profound ethical violation. You cannot find a patient capacitated only when they agree with you and incapacitated the moment you need to cement their decision.
And while they're playing this shell game with Nicholas's brain function, they are simultaneously executing a character assassination campaign against Kevin. The files show that the hospice coordinator, trying to set up the referral, couldn't reach Kevin immediately on the phone. So who do they call?
They dig into the file and contact an estranged stepsister named Rebecca Owen. The documents note she hadn't even seen Nicholas in over a year. She was completely uninvolved in his daily grueling care.
But Rebecca gets on the phone and provides a barrage of hearsay. She tells the hospital that Kevin is a drug user. She claims they live in motels. She paints this horrible picture.
And the hospital staff takes this hearsay from an estranged relative and officially codifies it into the medical record as if it were verified fact. They use it to bolster their APS reports. They even went so far as to document Kevin in the physician notes as, quote, not a legal spouse, putting the phrase in actual air quotes.
Which is medically irrelevant. In Arizona, a domestic partner is a statutory surrogate anyway, but the air quotes show the contempt. They are actively tricked to erase a 2-decade-long relationship.
It's malicious.
They even ordered an HIV test for Nicholas on July 1st, initiating an investigation for sexual abuse against Kevin while his husband was dying. The test came back negative, obviously, but the cruelty is staggering.
It forces us to ask a terrifying question about vulnerability. If you are lying in a hospital bed and the administration decides that your chosen advocate, the person you trust most in the world, is an obstacle to their financial or clinical goals, what power do you have?
None, apparently.
The hospital possesses the institutional machinery to call state agencies, generate false abuse investigations, weaponize hearsay, and convene internal ethics committees to override your legal documents. The imbalance of power is absolute.
That imbalance comes to a head on the night of June 30th. This is the climax of the MPOA siege. Kevin arrives at the hospital and he is furious. He realizes what is happening and he demands that Nicholas be restored to full code status, meaning he wants everything done to save his life.
We have a detailed record of this encounter because the charge nurse, Carolyn Wells, documented it. The night physician refuses to honor Kevin's request for full code. The doctor claims Kevin isn't legally the husband and claims there is no paperwork on file, even though the MPOA document is sitting right there in the electronic chart.
Kevin gets upset, as any human being would when a doctor refuses to treat their dying spouse.
He does, and the physician uses that completely justified anger against him. The doctor claims he felt threatened by Kevin's tone, although he later admitted to the nurse that he didn't feel verbally threatened, he just didn't like being challenged.
Oh.
And then the doctor does something highly unethical. He explicitly refuses to write a progress note about the encounter. He tells the nurse he did not want his name to become available to the partner.
He is deliberately refusing to document his clinical actions because he knows he is violating the MPOA and he wants to avoid legal accountability.
And the hospital backs the doctor up. They submit a report to their internal threat committee. They call security. They have Kevin physically removed from the premises and advise him not to stay overnight.
They successfully exile him, which means Nicholas spent the final nights of his life completely alone. You read the psychosocial assessments from the nurses during his final hours, and they are chilling. They just say, support person, not present.
The hospital had total unchecked control. Kevin was physically removed by security and legally undermined by the fraudulent APS reports. And according to the forensic audit, this is the exact window when the alleged clinical execution began. Which brings us to the actual medicine and smoking guns 3 and 4, pharmacological sabotage and consent fraud.
We spent a lot of time on the administrative manipulation. Let's look at the actual drugs they were putting into his clydate. The forensic report characterizes specific medication orders as outright medical battery. Let's start with smoking gun number 3, mannitol. What is mannitol and why is ordering it for Nicholas considered a smoking gun?
On June 25th, a nephrologist, a doctor who specializes in kidneys, orders mannitol for Nicholas. Mannitol is an osmotic diuretic. It's essentially a sugar alcohol. When you put it in the blood, it acts like a sponge, drawing excess fluid out of the brain and tissues and pulling it into the bloodstream.
Okay, so the fluid is in the blood. Where does it go from there?
Well, in a healthy person, the blood goes to the kidneys filter out that extra fluid, and you excrete it as urine. It's a very effective way to reduce swelling. But Nicholas has end-stage renal disease. He is anuric. His kidneys produce 0 urine.
So if you pull all this fluid from his tissues into his bloodstream and his kidneys can't filter it out, where does it go?
It has nowhere to go. It backs up catastrophically. It pushes into the lungs, into the extremities. Giving an osmotic diuretic to a patient without functioning kidneys is a lethal contraindication. It causes massive, rapid fluid overload. It would literally cause Nicholas to drown internally in his own fluids.
It's like turning a fire hose on inside a sealed room with all the drains permanently plugged. It is medically indefensible. How does a kidney specialist, the one doctor who absolutely knows Nicholas has no kidneys, order a drug that destroys patients without kidneys?
That is the central question of the demand letter. Was this an act of mind-boggling, reckless incompetence, or, as the documents argue, was it an intentional attempt to induce a terminal fluid overload crisis? A crisis that the hospital could then conveniently blame on his underlying kidney failure.
I mean, that's a terrifying thought.
We can't read the physician's mind, but we do know exactly why Nicholas survived that specific night. He survived because of charge nurse Carolyn Wells.
Let's build this scene out because the actions of Nurse Wells are incredible. It's the night shift, transitioning from June 25th to the 26th. She sits down at the computer, pulls up Nick's chart, and sees this active order for mannitol. What does she do?
As an experienced nurse, she sees the ESRD diagnosis and immediately recognizes the order is lethal. She refuses to pull the medication. She picks up the phone and calls the on-call internal medicine physician. She asks, very professionally, why mannitol was ordered for a patient who can't produce urine.
And the doctor says?
The doctor replies, I don't know why. They did not give to me and report this was ordered. So Nurse Wells asks him to please document the clinical rationale in the chart before she gives the drug. The physician's response is chilling. He says, I do not need to do that. This is a nephrologist order. You have an order. Follow the order.
Follow the order, even if the order makes no sense. Even if you know it will kill the patient. That is a terrifying look into the hierarchy of medicine. It's like an airline pilot intentionally pointing the nose of the plane at a mountain and telling the co-pilot, don't look at the instruments, just do what I say.
It shows how dangerous a culture of unquestioning compliance can be. But Nurse Wells refuses to comply. She escalates.
Good for her.
Yeah. She calls the house supervisor, who is the administrative authority at night, and gets her backing. Then Wells pages the on-call nephrologist directly. The nephrologist gets on the phone and insists the mannitol is necessary to treat Nicholas's elevated BUN levels and a recent seizure.
BUN, meaning blood urea nitrogen, a marker of kidney toxicity.
Right. But Wells is looking at the actual live data on her screen. She forces the nephrologist to look at the current lab results. She points out that Nicholas's BUN had actually dropped significantly from over 100 down to 66, and his potassium had stabilized.
She is holding the doctor's feet to the fire with hard data.
Exactly. Faced with undeniable proof that the clinical premise for the order was factually incorrect, the nephrologist hesitates, consults a more senior doctor, calls back, and abruptly cancels the order.
She literally saved his life that night. She committed professional insubordination to protect her patient. But the forensic audit shows that the questionable medication orders didn't stop with the mannitol.
No, they didn't. On June 24th, a psychiatrist named Dr. Hasenbeck ordered a drug called bupropion for Nicholas. Bupropion is a common antidepressant, but has one very famous major side effect. It lowers the seizure threshold in the brain. For this reason, it is strictly and universally contraindicated in patients who have a history of seizure disorders.
And according to the file, Nicholas had an active, documented seizure disorder dating back to 2022. It was right there in his chart.
And the tragic result is exactly what you would expect. On June 25th, the very same day the bupropion was ordered and administered, Nicholas had a massive witness seizure while he was strapped into a dialysis machine. His blood pressure skyrocketed to dangerous levels, over 200 systolic.
If one vigilant nurse could look at the computer screen and instantly see the mannitol was a lethal mistake, how is it possible that multiple specialists, pharmacists, and attending physicians missed both the mannitol and the bupropion? Kevin's argument is that it strains credulity to call this all just bad luck or incompetence.
The demand letters frame this as palliative aggression.
Palliative aggression.
Yes. The use of pharmacology not to heal the patient, but to accelerate their physical decline, to reinforce the narrative that the patient is crashing, agitated, and requires heavy sedation and a transition to hospice. And this aggressive pharmacology was paired with an administrative maneuver that constitutes smoking gun number 4, consent fraud.
This goes back to the core of patient rights. When Nicholas was admitted on June 23rd, what did he actually tell the doctors he wanted?
We have the admission documentation from Dr. Pham. The doctor charted that he evaluated Nicholas, found that he does have medical capacity, and documented that Nicholas would like to be full code.
Let's define full code for you listening.
Full code means that if the patient's heart stops beating or they stop breathing, the medical team will use every advanced life support measure available to save them. They will perform chest compressions, meaning CPR. They will intubate them and put them on a ventilator. They will use a defibrillator. Nicholas explicitly stated, while capacitated, that he wanted to live. He wanted them to fight for him.
But the records show that on June 24th, just one day later, his code status was quietly changed in the computer system. It was changed from full code to intubation without CPR.
Intubation without CPR. From a physiological standpoint, that is a useless, nonsensical code status. If a patient's heart has stopped, putting a plastic tube down their throat to blow oxygen into their lungs does absolutely nothing if you aren't doing chest compressions to pump that oxygenated blood to the brain.
Who authorized that change? Who told the computer to restrict his care?
According to Kevin's forensic audit of the audit trails, no one legally authorized it. There is zero documented consent from Nicholas changing his mind. There is zero documented consultation with Kevin, who was the legal MPOA. There isn't even a note from an ethics committee attempting to justify unilateral change. Someone just went into the system and altered his legal right to self-determination.
Under Arizona state law, that is the definition of medical battery. A hospital cannot change a patient's code status. They cannot withdraw life-sustaining parameters against their explicit capacitated wishes without rigorous due process. It is a fundamental violation of consent.
It is an administrative death sentence passed in silence. And as Nicholas's physical condition began to rapidly deteriorate over the next few days, the hospital kept this fraudulent code status active in the system, which sets the stage for the final, fatal sequence of events.
We're entering the timeline of his death. The mannitol was starved by a heroic nurse, but Nicholas was still incredibly sick. And according to the forensic report, the hospital deployed its final strategy, doing absolutely nothing to fix a fatal problem while actively administering a drug that suppressed his ability to survive it. This brings us to smoking guns 5 and 6, the final code and palliative aggression.
By June 30th, the clinical picture was grim. A case management note indicated that Nicholas had fluid building up in his left lung. This is common for ESRD patients who miss dialysis, but by July 1st, the radiological imaging was catastrophic. A physician noted a complete left lung opacification.
Meaning the X-ray of his left lung was completely white. It was entirely filled with fluid.
Yes. And an afternoon chest x-ray on July 1st confirmed an even more critical, life-threatening finding. A mediastinal shift. This is smoking gun number 5.
Let's break down the anatomy here so we understand exactly what was happening inside his chest. What is a mediastinal shift?
The mediastinum is the central compartment of the chest cavity. It houses the most critical structures of your body: the heart, the major blood vessels like the aorta and vena cava, and the trachea. When you have a massive pleural effusion, which is fluid filling the space around the lung, that fluid gets heavy.
It's very heavy.
Right. If it's not drained, the sheer volume and pressure of that fluid on the left side becomes so great that it physically crushes the left lung and then starts pushing the entire mediastinum heart and all over to the right side of the chest.
It is literally crushing his heart from the outside.
Exactly. The pressure compresses the great veins, meaning blood can't return to the heart properly. If a mediastinal shift is not immediately decompressed, it will inevitably lead to cardiovascular collapse and death. The heart just gets squeezed until it stops.
And what is the standard medical procedure to fix this? How do you save a patient with a mediastinal shift?
You perform an emergency thoracentesis. A doctor inserts a needle or a catheter through the chest wall directly into that fluid pocket and physically drains the fluid out. It relieves the pressure instantly, allowing the heart to move back into place and the lung to re-expand. It is a fundamental life-saving procedure.
Did the doctors at Banner Health know how to do this? Did they know it would work for Nicholas?
The records show they absolutely knew, because they had successfully performed a thoracentesis on Nicholas for the exact same issue a year prior, in August 2023. They had the precedent, they had the equipment, they had the x-rays confirming the shift on July 1st.
So with his heart being crushed, what did the hospital do?
According to the chart, they did nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. There was no urgent recommendation to perform a thoracentesis. There was no surgical consult called. They just watched the x-rays and waited. The demand letters categorized this not just as gross negligence, but as a willful refusal to treat a known fatal condition.
And as if refusing to drain the fluid wasn't enough, while Nicholas is lying there suffocating, his heart being compressed, the medical team introduces smoking gun number 6.
The administration of Dilaudid. Dilaudid, or hydromorphone, is an exceptionally potent opioid painkiller. It is roughly 5 to 7 times stronger than morphine. On the afternoon of June 30th, right as this mediastinal shift was developing and his lung was filling with fluid, they gave him his first dose of IV Dilaudid. And they continued to administer it repeatedly over the next 3 days, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd.
To be fair, though, we know he was in immense pain. The records show he was reporting pain levels of 9 out of 10 and 10 out of 10. Isn't giving a painkiller the compassionate thing to do? Why is this a smoking gun?
Because of the mechanism of action of the drug. Opioids like Dilaudid are profound respiratory depressants. They work by acting on the brainstem to relieve pain, but they also chemically suppress the brain's natural urge to breathe.
Oh, God. So you have a patient whose left lung is completely crushed by fluid and his heart is being squeezed out of place. He needs every ounce of neurological drive he has to take rapid, shallow breaths just to stay oxygenated.
And they are pumping him full of a drug that tells his brain to stop trying to breathe. Combining a massive, untreated mediastinal shift with continuous doses of Dilaudid is a physiological recipe for death. His lung was physically trapped by the fluid, and the Dilaudid was chemically removing his instinct to fight for air. As the forensic report argues, they were suffocating him from the outside in and the inside out.
The analogy Kevin uses in his letters is haunting. He essentially says the hospital tied Nick's hands behind his back, threw him into the deep end of the pool, and then pointed to him drowning and called it the natural progression of his disease.
It's a dark image, but it fits the data.
The hospital uses the language of comfort care and easing suffering. But who gets to decide that a life is futile? They use the shield of palliative care to mask the mechanical execution of a patient who actively wanted to live.
The documentation of his final hours strips away any illusion of peaceful comfort care. He spent his final 8 hours alive, entirely alone, cycling in agony. A psychosocial assessment note was entered by an RN named Kevin Vidal at 8:30 a.m. on July 3rd, just 1 hour before Nicholas died.
What did the note say?
The nurse labeled Nicholas's effect as irritable, needy. He labeled his behavior as disruptive, and he noted, once again, support person, not present.
Even as he was drowning in his own chest, the chart was still insulting him. He was needy because he was suffocating. And then the inevitable happens. The code blue. Talk me through the timeline of the morning of July 3rd.
At 9:38 a.m., Nicholas is found unresponsive in his bed. He is pulseless, he is cyanotic, meaning his skin is turning blue from a complete lack of oxygen. The staff calls a code blue, and the resuscitation team rushes into the room.
What does the medical record say happened during that code?
There is a nursing note from an RN named Jamie Navarrete that details a truly horrific display of circular bureaucratic logic. The code team arrives. They confirm he has no pulse. But the note explicitly states that chest compressions could not be commenced as the patient's documented code status was intubation without CPR.
They checked the computer. They saw the fraudulent code status, the one that was altered without his consent on June 24th.
Yeah.
And they obeyed it. They refused to pump his chest.
Yes. So they are standing around a pulseless man, refusing to do CPR. Then the primary medical team discusses intubating him, which is technically allowed under that bizarre code status.
Okay.
But they decide that putting a breathing tube down his throat would not function because he had no cardiac activity. And without CPR to circulate the blood, the oxygen wouldn't go anywhere. Therefore, they concluded intubation would just be, quote, unnecessary trauma.
Unnecessary trauma. They push him out of the boat, refuse to throw him a life preserver because of a fraudulent document, and then say it would be traumatic to pull him out of the water because he's already drowned. So they just stood there.
They did nothing. They officially declared Nicholas Araya dead at 9:38 a.m.
But the horrifying reality of the documentation doesn't stop at 9:38 a.m. This is where Kevin Benham's forensic audit reveals something that defies all medical explanation.
The demand letters highlight a massive glaring irregularity in the official hospital electronic medical record, the post-mortem charting.
Yeah, explain this card.
The official EMR medication administration record shows that doses of 40-diloted, a highly regulated Schedule II narcotic, were logged as being administered to Nicholas at 10:59 a.m. and again at 1:32 p.m.
Wait, let me make sure I understand this. He was declared legally dead by a team of doctors at 9:38 a.m. And the hospital's own official computer system says nurses were injecting him with 40 narcotics at 11 in the morning and 1:30 in the afternoon.
That's what it says.
How on earth does a hospital explain charting the administration of heavy drugs to a corpse?
From an auditing perspective, there are only two possible explanations, and both are completely damning. The first possibility is gross incompetence. It means the medical record was in a state of total chaotic disarray during and after the code blue, and nurses were just blindly clicking buttons in the software hours later to close out tasks without any regard for accuracy.
Which means the entire chart is unreliable.
Precisely. The second possibility is far more sinister. It suggests active, chaotic tampering with the EMR after the fact. It implies that staff realized there were discrepancies or missing documentation regarding when the massive doses of respiratory depressants were given, and they retroactively altered the timestamps to try and cover their tracks, messing up the timeline in the panic.
Either they are dangerously incompetent at recording reality, or they are actively trying to rewrite it. Either way, it shatters the integrity of the very medical record the hospital relies on to defend its actions.
Nicholas Araya died on July 3, 2025. That date carries an immense, heartbreaking weight. He died exactly 20 years to the day after he and Kevin first moved in together. July 3, 2005 to July 3, 2025. What should have been a milestone anniversary celebrating 2 decades of life and love became a day of institutional termination.
The fight for his life ended that morning in that hospital room. But the fight for accountability was just beginning. Which brings us to the aftermath and what Kevin Benham did next. Most people, after enduring the trauma of watching their spouse die like this, would just collapse. They would grieve, and the hospital would close the file, relying on the fact that grieving families rarely have the energy to fight an institution.
And Kevin Benham acknowledges that fear in his writings. He writes about the terrifying realization that society might not care. He was terrified that he would spend thousands of hours digging through these files, uncover the truth, and then realize the hospital was right all along, that they could get away with it because nobody in the power structure cares about a disabled, chronically ill, marginalized gay man with a stigmatized medical history.
But he didn't stop. He requested the complete electronic medical record export. He didn't just ask for the summary, he demanded the core chart, the metadata, the audit trail showing who logged in and when, the billing records. He received 60,000 pages of data, and he read every single page.
And what he found in the hospital's own data gave him the precise ammunition he needed. He drafted incredibly detailed formal demand letters. He didn't just send them to a customer service rep, he sent them to the CEO of Banner Health, the Arizona Attorney General, the Arizona Medical Board, the Joint Commission, which accredits the hospital, and Adult Protective Services.
And he isn't just asking for a financial settlement for a malpractice claim. He's demanding criminal investigations.
He is demanding that the state pursue charges for medical battery regarding the code status change, fraudulent documentation regarding the narcotics and capacity, neglect of a vulnerable adult, and reckless endangerment. The demand letters are built around a very specific legal standard in Arizona. Kevin argues that the hospital administration and staff met the Arizona Supreme Court's definition of an evil mind.
An evil mind? That sounds like a concept from a comic book, but what does that actually mean in a court of law?
In Arizona jurisprudence, proving an evil mind is the threshold required to award punitive damages in civil court, and it often overlaps with the mental state required for serious criminal charges. It doesn't mean the doctor was twirling a mustache and laughing.
Right.
Legally, it means proving that a defendant consciously disregarded a substantial, outrageous risk of tremendous harm to the victim. It means they saw the danger, they fully appreciated how bad it was, and they consciously chose to proceed anyway.
And Kevin is pointing to the paper trail to prove it. The June 30th APS note isn't an accident. It's a conscious strategy to remove an advocate. The Manitou order isn't a typo. It's a conscious disregard of renal physiology. The untreated mediastinal shift isn't an oversight. It's a conscious choice to watch a man suffocate on an X-ray and do nothing.
It is the ultimate form of institutional hubris. They documented their own malfeasance in the official chart because they literally believed they were untouchable. They believed that because of Nicholas's labels, addict, aggressive, high utilizer, no one would ever bother to check their work.
How did Banner Health respond when Kevin sent them this massive, undeniable pile of their own evidence?
According to the forensic report, Banner Health engaged in what Kevin describes as a calculated corporate gaslighting campaign. They sent a response letter that completely evaded the substantive legal realities. They ignored the fact that the code change was unauthorized. They completely dismissed Kevin's statutory authority as a surrogate under state law. They offered no explanation for the lethal mannitol or bupropion errors.
And what about the mediastinal shift? How did they explain letting him drown in fluid?
They sanitized it. They referred to his death from an untreated, mechanically crushing fluid buildup as a complex medical outcome.
A complex medical outcome. That is the most sanitized, soulless euphemism for watching a human being suffocate and refusing to help. When we look at all of this, what is the most critical systemic change that needs to happen to prevent a hospital from legally locking out a medical power of attorney like they did to Kevin?
It isn't necessarily about creating new laws, it's about the fierce enforcement of existing ones. Arizona statute ARS 36-323-1 already explicitly grants the MPOA priority. The failure here was systemic noncompliance facilitated by a total lack of immediate external oversight. Hospitals should not be allowed to convene internal closed-door ethics committees to override legal documents without immediate emergency judicial review by an outside judge.
And what about the APS calls?
Furthermore, the weaponization of mandatory reporting to Adult Protective Services needs rigorous prosecutorial scrutiny. If a doctor admits in writing that an APS report is being used as a legal tactic rather than out of genuine concern for safety, that doctor must face immediate perjury or false reporting charges. The immunity shield must be pierced when it is used maliciously.
If we pull back and reflect on the broader implications of this for everyone listening, Nicholas's case is presented in these documents not just as a tragedy, but as a blueprint. If a major $15 billion hospital system can systematically engineer a death, using standard administrative policies, case management algorithms, and EMR narratives to optimize their Medicare financials, how many other people have gone through this?
That is the chilling question Kevin's expose leaves hanging in the air. How many other high utilizer patients, how many other chronically ill, complex individuals have had their deaths categorized neatly as cardiac arrest secondary to complex illness, when in reality they were administrative excisions? They were financial liabilities quietly managed off the balance sheet. To the algorithm, Nicholas was just a line item causing financial toxicity.
But Nicholas Araya was not a line item. He was a 39-year-old fighter. He was a man who endured 7 strokes, the loss of his sight, the loss of his mobility, and the agony of dialysis, and he still had the profound strength to tell his doctors upon admission, "I want to be full code." He wanted to live.
He did. And the profound tragedy documented in these 60,000 pages is that the institution sworn by oath to protect his life ran the numbers, looked at the metrics, and decided they simply couldn't afford to let him.
Let's recap the journey we've taken through these documents today, because the sheer weight of the failure is staggering. We started with the financial motive of modern value-based care, where Nick's 23 necessary hospital admissions transformed him into a financial toxicity threatening a corporate bottom line.
Right. We saw the psychological setup, the medical gaslighting, where doctors weaponized his history, ignoring organic brain damage to build a false profile of an aggressive problem patient.
We detailed the systematic legal siege on his husband, Kevin, using bad faith APS reports and capacity manipulation to isolate Nicholas from his only advocate.
And finally, we walk through the horrifying clinical choices. The contraindicated mannitol, the seizure-inducing bupropion, the untreated mediastinal shift, the respiratory suppression of continuous dilaudid, and the final code blue, where the team stood down based on a fraudulent, unauthorized code status.
It is a comprehensive, multidisciplinary failure across nursing, medicine, administration, and ethics. And the forensic sources argue it was entirely legally intentional. Which brings us back to you, the listener. We spent this time talking about one man's chart, but this is a stark warning about your own. You have to aggressively protect your medical records. Check your chart. Read the visit summaries. If a doctor puts a label like non-compliant or agitated or anxious in your file, question it immediately and demand it be corrected if it's false.
Absolutely. Those are not just descriptive words. They are narrative weapons that prime the next doctor to dismiss your symptoms, and they can dictate the standard of care you receive for the rest of your life.
The electronic medical record is permanent. It is a digital reputation. If a bias is introduced on day 1, it will follow you to year 10. Ensure your medical power of attorney is ironclad, legally notarized, and physically present in the file. And make sure the person you appoint knows that their job isn't just to hold your hand. They might have to fight the very institution you are in just to keep you alive.
It's a sad reality, but a necessary preparation.
We started this deep dive talking about how reading this medical record felt like reading the blueprint for a heist. We spend so much time in our culture worrying about artificial intelligence taking over healthcare, about computers making cold, calculated decisions about our lives.
Right, the AI fear.
But Nicholas Araya's story suggests we are looking in the wrong direction. We should be far more terrified of the very human-made, corporate algorithms of value-based care. If your mere survival is deemed a financial toxicity to the multi-billion-dollar institution sworn to heal you, who exactly is your doctor working for? The Hippocratic oath they took to do no harm, or the corporate bottom line they serve?
It's a question that demands an answer, not just for accountability in Nicholas's death, but for the safety of every single patient who will inevitably need a hospital bed tomorrow.